Hi Year 11, this video is designed to help you with your understanding of the nephron and the processes that are going on within it. Now, when we talk about the nephron, recognize what it is. It's the functional unit of the kidney. It is where blood is going to be coming in, and that blood is going to be filtered, and parts of that blood will therefore no longer be in the blood. They will be in the beginnings of a urine. That urine will then have critical components reabsorbed, taken back into it, as it works its way through the nephron and eventually leaves the nephron, heading out through a collecting duct into a ureter and onto the bladder. Okay, so big things that happen in the nephron. You've got yourself, as I said, filtration, and you've also got yourself reabsorption. Now, this being biology and it being functional biology, the nature of the things that happen are strongly related to the structures that are present in the nephron. As a result of that, we broadly divide the nephron into two parts. The first part is your Bowman's capsule. Now, the Bowman's capsule is a cup-shaped blind ending part of the nephron. You've also then got the long renal tube, and that's all the twisty parts that include that weird looking loop thing, which is called a loop of Henle. Now, I want to focus on the Bowman's capsule first, okay? So the Bowman's capsule is going to be situated right in the cortex of the actual kidney. Now, that differs to things like the loop of Henle, which are very much in the medulla. Now, at the beginning of the Bowman's capsule are a network of capillaries. Those are blood vessels where the exchange of substances can occur. And by the exchange of substances, in this case, we're talking things like water, like salts, like urea. Okay, but that glomerulus, those capillaries, okay, the blood's going to be coming into them by branching off from the renal artery, and it enters via something called an afferent arteriole, and it will be leaving by something called an efferent arteriole. Now, the difference between those two: afferent means going towards, efferent means going away from. The efferent arteriole will then split into a whole bunch of capillaries around the renal tube, and they will eventually hook back into the branches of the renal vein. Okay, so there's your structures. You've got your Bowman's capsule. Okay, in your Bowman's capsule, you've got this network of capillaries called a glomerulus. Okay, now let's talk about how the blood is filtered. Our first of two processes, filtration. Each glomerulus and Bowman's capsule are basically a tiny pressure filter. Okay, and the fluid that is coming through the blood is coming through those capillary walls. Now, what's driving that process? Well, the beating of your heart and your blood pressure. Okay, your blood is under pressure and it's being squeezed into these really narrow capillaries, and the ones in the glomerulus are particularly narrow. Okay, now this is rapid, it happens really quickly. And part of the reason for that is, as I've said, because the filtration, the blood pressure in the glomerular capillaries is about twice what it would be in the rest of the body. And what that creates is a bottleneck. It forces all of that, all the blood through into a very narrow passage. Now, the capillaries in the glomerulus, or the glomerular capillaries, allow all the substances in the plasma, the liquid that makes up the blood, with the exception of protein, to leak out. Okay, so basically anything smaller than a protein is going to be leaving the blood. Okay, so what's bigger than a protein? Well, protein, and obviously things like platelets and red blood cells and white blood cells, they're too big to get through. Point of fact, if they do get through, you have a problem in your kidney. Go and see a doctor. Go and see a doctor immediately. Okay, but the liquid filtering through into the Bowman's capsule basically is plasma minus proteins, and it gets a fancy name. It gets called glomerular filtrate. It contains many useful substances. So it's stuff in the blood that's useful that has now been filtered out. And let me be specific. You're talking about things like glucose, talking about things like amino acids, talking about other substances that you've got from digestion of food. It's also going to have those harmful substances like urea, like water, potentially, and some other substances like salts. Okay, and it's the useful stuff that you're going to want to get back. You're going to want to get back your glucose because you need that for respiration. You're going to want to get back your amino acids because you're going to need to make your own proteins. You're going to want to get back some of that water because if you urinate it all away, you're going to dehydrate painfully and die. you're going to need to get back your salts because a lack of salts can cause its own problems. Google hyponatremia. Um, you don't want that urea. You want that stuff gone. So there's stuff that you want to get back and there's stuff that you want to get gone. Okay, and so that leads us to our next process, reabsorption, the getting of the stuff back. So when you look at your diagram of your nephron, what you'll see is that each renal tubule is surrounded by this network of capillaries, okay? And the liquid moves along the first tubule, or the proximal tubule, proximal meaning first, and all the glucose and amino acids, together with most of the salts, are going to be reabsorbed. Okay, they're going to be taken back into the blood. Now, this doesn't happen for free. Okay, this is one of the reasons why the kidneys need such a massive blood supply. That requires energy. So that's going to require glucose to be supplied to these parts of the kidney so they can actually actively pump those substances back into the blood. Okay, because you put them in there and we need to be getting them back in there. So what will happen is then that the dissolved substances that have been removed, okay, they're going to be so they're all going to be taken back into the blood. And the consequence of them coming back into the blood is that you're not going to have much left there other than, well, water, urea, maybe some salts. Okay. But what that means is that the concentration of water in that filtrate is going to be larger than it is in the blood vessels that surround it. And if you remember year 9 and year 10, you will have studied something called diffusion. And that's the idea that substances move from a high to a low concentration. Okay, so if there's something in a really high concentration, it will passively be able to move from that area to an area of low concentration. Crude example, you walk into a room, you let out a massive fart, real eggy monster, right? That fart will spread across the room. The reason it will do that is because particles move from where they are in high concentration to where they are in low concentration. They fill the space. So here we have all these water molecules that are in a far higher concentration in the proximal convoluted tubule as they're moving down that, okay, than they will be into the, but than they are in the blood that surrounds it. So what then happens is that that water is going to diffuse, and the fancy science word used to describe the diffusion of water is osmosis. So they'll move by osmosis from the tubule into the blood. And the result of that is that most of the water that's in that filtrate is also reabsorbed, and that happens in the first tubule. Okay, so the consequence of that is that the urea is going to get much, much, much more concentrated by the time it gets to the end of all the twisted tubules and gets to that collecting duct. So what the consequence of that is that you have filtered out a whole bunch of things, but then you have reabsorbed most of them. Okay, leaving you behind with a more concentrated in terms of urea and probably slightly more concentrated in terms of salts and with a bit of water. That's the urine. But there will absolutely, or there should absolutely not be any amino acids or glucose or red blood cells or proteins. Okay, so that's where that all goes from there. Now, what that will do is regulate the concentration of the water in the body. But your body also has the facility to control and decrease how much water it will reabsorb. And that will depend on what its internal conditions are. That's that homeostasis process I described earlier. Okay, so broadly, that's your nephron and how it does its job. Okay, so please go back over it, check it to the diagram. It's a big idea, arguably the biggest idea when we're talking about the kidney, but a good understanding of the structures, the glomerulus, the Bowman's capsule, the proximal convoluted tubule, the loop of Henle, the reabsorption that happens there, okay, and then the moving on to the collecting duct. All of that will help you in getting your solid grounding as we move in towards the internal.